Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the Java track up to this point. We've covered a lot of cool material, but I know that we had a very lecture intensive previous video, so I want to make sure I go on the opposite end of the spectrum this time and give you a more hands-on approach to coding and learning Java. So for the purpose of this video, there's a few key components that I want to cover, and I've listed out at a high level exactly what the overview of this video is going to be. We're going to be covering first variables, and that's going to be refreshing on some of the types that we've talked about in the past. That's Boolean, int, float, double, and then we're also going to build upon that with some arithmetic operations, and that's going to be the things that you interact with on a day-to-day basis, like addition and subtraction of two numbers, multiplication, whatever the operation is. Once you get the hang of one or two, the rest are pretty much mirror images of that. Along this section, there's one key thing I want to touch upon, and that's the difference between an integer division and floating point division. So that will be, at least in the coding form, dividing two integer types and dividing two double types. And that's just something we want to keep in mind because this is a very important concept, especially when you start going out and writing your own Java programs. It could be the source of a lot of error and bugs within your code if you don't pay attention to it and use each one where it needs to be. The second key thing I want to touch upon in this section is assigning results to different variables. And that's going to be the results of different operations that we run. And this is, again, is a very cool feature of programming languages in general. It's very important that we touch upon this early on so that you can get into coding and using this yourself. The second thing I want to touch upon is some of the key methods associated with strings. They are one of the most important data types that any programmer is going to come in contact with. Quite frankly, there's no way that you can be a programmer and then expect not to come into contact with strings in some capacity. It's just used on a day-to-day basis, and I can guarantee you that moving forward with your coding careers, this is something that you're going to have hands down, and you're going to have to understand each of the different ways that it's implemented in different languages. And we're just going to get into at least the Java implementation of it, and we'll touch upon some of the methods associated with this type as well. The key thing here is just, again, learning how to use strings in the Java program itself. The third thing that we want to touch upon is outputting to the console, but this time we're going to be doing it with variables and even combinations of variables, as opposed to what we did in that Hello World video, where we just outputted a simple message to the console. So we'll be building upon some of the knowledge that we've acquired up to this point. It's going to be a great video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And I pulled up Eclipse now. This step is not too bad. Just go to either your desktop and double click the Eclipse icon, which will launch Eclipse, or you can go to a search bar if you have that, and you can search for the program itself. Once you have all of that ready, this step is pretty simple as far as what we need to do. There's just a few things that you need to remember. You'll want to go to the file, go to new, and then go to Java project. And once you go to Java project, you can give it some name. I'll just type in anything right now because I'm not going to actually use this project. I have a project set up. I just want to walk you through the steps of what you need to get done in order to have your own Java project set up. And this is, again, is building upon things that we've done before. This is just a quick little refresher of how to get that project set up. The next thing you want to do once you have a project name, make sure it's a relevant name. Obviously, don't choose any name that I've chosen like this. A good name for what we're going to be doing is sample demo, and that's actually what I've called the project we'll be working on today. So you can go ahead and use that same name as well. Once you have a name, though, click that next step, and once you click that next step, it'll have some options here. You can go ahead and then just hit finish, but because I don't want to create this project, I'm actually just going to hit cancel. I don't need this project to be set up. Once you get to the project, it should show up in your package explorer. And what you want to do from there is hit this little arrow right next to the name, and that'll have a drop down. And when you have it like this, you'll initially see the JRE system library and you'll see the source folder. What you want to do at that point is then go and create, go in right click on the source folder and then create a new Java class. So you do that by going to new and then you click class. So once you get to that point, you'll have a name for it. I've just called the class main. As I've mentioned before, this again comes from the fact that Java is an object-oriented programming language. So in order for you to write code, it has to be encompassed within a class. And the main method is essentially the important part of what we're going to be doing for these next few videos at least. And that's where all of our Java code is going to go, because when we hit this run button right here, that's what's being run. It's the code that's within that main method. So that needs to be encompassed within a class. We can go ahead and put any name for it, whatever. That's not the main part here. The main part is that you go and create that class. The next thing that we'll do is actually a bit different from how we did it in the Hello World project, is that if we want to create that main method, we don't have to manually create it ourselves. We can save ourselves some time by just hitting this check mark in the which method stubs would you like to create. And once we do that and then hit the finish button after putting a name for the class, it'll go ahead and automatically generate that for us. So we don't have to do that. And you'll know that it's automatically generated when you go to your class, you open it up, and you'll see this comment that says to do auto-generated method stub. And that's what you'll see on your end as well. We don't need to regard the comment right now. It's actually not important to what we're doing, so we can go ahead and ignore that. What I did want to show is, again, a quick little refresher on different data types, assigning them to the variables. And this is going to look very similar to some of the examples that I posted in the lecture slides associated with that previous video. But again, I just want to refresh this so that we can get right into the coding aspect of it and help jog that memory. The first thing I do want to show is a variable of type int, and we'll just go ahead and call this variable1. Not exactly the best name in the world for a variable because it doesn't have any significance to it. It won't help me identify what this variable is being used for. So when you go about actually writing your own Java programs, keep that in mind and make sure you're using variable names that are relevant. It's just good coding practice, and it'll be viewed favorably when you actually enter the workforce and want to create your own Java programs in a professional setting. But for today's purposes, I just want to demonstrate how these things work. I'm not using the best practices, but let's just disregard that for now. Once you have int variable1, again, we're using that assignment operator. We talked about the single equal sign is an assignment operator in Java, and what that means is it'll take whatever's on the right side of the assignment operator and assign it to the variable on the left side. So if I were to go and type in something like equals 1, that'll take the value of 1 and assign that to variable 1. Which is the variable of type int. And you want to make sure you're using, again, the right types, because if I were to go and do something like 1.0, that'll actually throw a syntax error because it's not expecting that a floating point number be assigned to an int, and it won't let you do that. You want to make sure that you're very cognizant of the types that you're using and the data you're assigning to those variables. Then next, let's just go about the process of having a Boolean variable. Let's call that is happy, and we can assign it the value of true, because this variable indicates that something is happy. We don't know what that something is. It's not exactly relevant, but whatever it is happy. And again, just another little refresher from that previous video, because we're using true as one of the Boolean types, you want to make sure you're using the proper syntax for Java. If I were to go and change the T to a capital T, it wouldn't recognize it as a Boolean value. And that'll throw back, again, another syntax error. So again, true and false when assigning to Boolean and using in the context as a Boolean value, they need to be in the proper Java form. And that's going to be lowercase for what we're doing. The third thing is let's just have a little double variable. We can call this variable 2, and let's assign that to 2.0. So again, like we can see, we have a floating point number assigned to this variable, and then we can go about actually doing some cool things with some of these variables. This is, again, just a little refresher on how we go about actually creating variables in Java and then initializing them with distinct values. Obviously, of whatever the proper data type is that's associated with a certain variable. But now that we have that out of the way, I'm going to leave some of these lines of code. We'll come back to them again. The part I want to focus on right now is of the int. And let's go in and have another int variable. The reason I want to have another one is because I want to demonstrate to you the concept of using arithmetic operations with variables. And we'll call this variable 3. Again, not the best naming conventions for these variables, especially because the names don't signify anything. But let's disregard that for now and just focus on some of the other concepts that we want to get through today. When we have each of these variables assigned with different values, we can actually go about and output the value of different arithmetic operations between these two variables. So if you recall from how we did it in the Hello World video, we can do a system.out.println, and then just make sure with all statements you write in Java that you're using a semicolon to terminate that statement. Otherwise, it's not syntactically correct, and the compiler won't let you get through actually executing that Java program. But very simply here, what we can do is, let's say we want to perform the addition of these two variables. We can do that by first referencing the first variable, which is variable 1. And you can see that once I've typed in the name, that this little box highlights that variable, showing that it's the one being referenced. And then once we do that, we can just do a plus sign, and we can do variable, not variable 2, that's not the right type, but variable 3. And there we go. So once we do that, we can go ahead and hit this play button right here, and it'll run main.java. And let's see what happens. Okay, and then we can see right on the console that we've taken variable 1, we've taken variable 3, and we've performed a summation between those two. Let's say right after the summation, we wanted to go about actually having the multiplication of these two variables. Then we can go and actually do just variable 1 times variable 3. And when we go and hit that run button again, it should perform the multiplication of those two variables, which we can see right there. Now, we can also do division and subtraction. Subtraction would be done by a minus sign like this, and division would be done by the division operator in Java, which is just a /. Right now, if we were to go about actually performing this, this division. This is where the concept of integer division comes in. So in your math classes, when you divide 1 divided by 2, you know that it's a fractional amount that you'll be left with, which is 0.5. But because we're dealing with integers being divided by other integers, that means that the result of whatever is going to be produced can also only be another integer. And fractional amounts, by definition, are not integer amounts. So what does that mean in the context of what we're doing? That means that if we were to go and do 1 divided by 2, the answer that will be outputted can't possibly be 0.5. But rather, it'll have to be some integer amount. And what will that integer amount be? So what Java actually does, and this is something that you should note down, when it does integer division, it'll take whatever the actual quotient is, let's say 1 divided by 2.5, and it'll truncate everything after the decimal point. So what you'll be left with is not 0.5, but rather you'll be left with just the 0. The 0.5, which is everything after the decimal point and beyond, will be truncated, which means that it won't actually show up in the result. And just to show this as a proof of concept, I can go ahead and hit this run button, and we'll see right here on the console that it actually returns you a 0. You might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, if I wanted to do 1 divided by 2, how would I actually be getting the answer that I'm expecting? And that answer that you would be expecting is 0.5. There's actually one interesting way to do it, and that's using floating point division. And this is something that we haven't covered yet, but I want to go ahead and create another variable. Let's call this variable 4, and let's assign this 4.0, just so that we can get some relevant answer. And we can go and actually do system.out. Again, the same way that we did it with integers. It's nothing different when we're doing arithmetic operations between the type double. And what I'll be showing you is variable 2 divided by variable 4. And I'll go ahead and just comment this out by doing 2 forward slashes because I don't want that result to show for now. Let's go ahead and hit that run button again and click OK. And we'll see that the result is 0.5. So when you know that you're going to be performing the division of two things that may or may not result in a fractional amount, and you know that for a fact, then you want to go ahead and actually have your data stored as the type double as opposed to being of the type integer, so that when you perform division between the two data points, that floating point division is used, and it'll actually return the right answer to you, as opposed to truncating everything after the decimal point. And that's a very important distinction to make very early on in your coding careers, because this is something that I guarantee you all will experience at some point when you're up late at night coding away at some program and you run into a bug that's returning the wrong amounts, the wrong results, and after 30 minutes, an hour, however long the time is, you'll finally come back to analyze where things are going wrong. It might be the arithmetic operations, and you'll see that rather than using integer division, had you used double division or floating point division, that you would actually get the result that you were expecting. It's a very simple change to make, but it could take hours upon hours, especially if you're writing large Java code, to come back and figure out exactly what the source of that error was. So again, just something to note. I think it's a pretty cool distinction to make, and it's going to be one of those important ones that you should definitely remember as you go about the process of creating your own Java programs. Enough about those two, though. We've now gone through some basic arithmetic operations with integers and double types. But what I want to show now is how we can actually take some of the results that we've generated and store them into new variables. So let's say I have a int result variable. Let's just call it result. And what I want to do is I want to take whatever variable 1 is and variable 3. I want to perform addition between those two, and I want to store that result in some other variable that I can use at a later point in time. So how you go about doing that is very simple again. It would be kind of like what we did here, except we're using explicit data. Instead, we would be taking the reference to variable 1, adding it to the reference of variable 3, semicolon to terminate that statement. And what this piece of code right here will do is, before the assignment, it'll actually go about the process of performing the arithmetic operation and take that result and store that into our variable. So that's just the basics of how the assignment operator works. It actually performs the operations on the right side of the operator prior to taking whatever that data is and assigning it to the left side. So that means variable 1 gets summed up with variable 3, and only then will that result be stored in this result variable. And we can just have a new line of code that illustrates that this piece of code works. And we'll do system.out.println again, and let's just go about that process by printing out whatever result is. And I'll comment this line out for now, just so that we don't have anything else clogging up that console. Let's click that run button again, and we'll see 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. Now we can also change this operation to the multiplication operation. That should return 2 now. Really, like I said at the beginning of this, once you get the hang of working with 1 or 2 of the arithmetic operations, you'll really get the hang of all of them, because they're pretty much mirror images of one another, and they'll work on integer types, they'll work on floating point types. So whatever I'm doing here is very similar to what you can do at the double level as well. So if I wanted to do the double result, let's just call this result 2 is equal to, oh, can't do that. Result 2 is equal to variable 1, or variable 2 actually, plus variable 4. And then we can do system.out.println, and we'll do result 2. We'll comment this line of code out for now because we don't really need that to be displayed. The answer that should be printed out is 6. This is just again to prove that this piece of code works for floating point types as well. So now we've gone and refreshed a little bit about different data types, how to assign the different data types, perform basic arithmetic operations, and also store arithmetic operations and the results of those arithmetic operations to different variables. That makes things a lot easier for us, because now we don't have to get confused by having everything happen within this system.out statement. Rather, we can have reusable operations, and we can have this result of whatever variable 1 times variable 3 is, for example, and reuse that result a number of times without having to again re-perform that operation every time. And that could have performance implications, especially when you're not performing these computations 1 or 2 times, but rather 1 million or 2 million times. If you have to go about the process every single time you want to use that number, if you want to perform that computation every single time, that'll take a whole lot more time rather than performing that computation once, storing that into a variable, and then just using the value of that variable. Again, these are things that you can just keep in the back of your mind as you get more advanced with your programming. These are implications that you'll see have more merit. But for now, just know that this is a capability of Java that makes it a whole lot more clean for you to write Java code, and it will be very important later on in your coding careers. Okay, so now that all of this is pretty much dealt with, I'm going to go ahead and actually remove some of this code just so that we have a nice clean slate to work off of. As I mentioned, we wanted to talk about the string type and how you can actually assign string values to string variables. Let's go ahead and call this string message. And as I mentioned in that previous lecture, strings in Java are encompassed by or enclosed by opening and closing double quotes. So let's say that this is a Java message. That can be our message for now. And we can make it nice and easy for us by just going ahead and printing whatever this message is. So we'll do a system.out.println, and we'll print that message. And we see that this is a Java message, and that's pretty cool. Now that we have a basic understanding of how to initialize string variables with string values, we know that obviously we can take whatever's encompassed within these quotes and we can change it to whatever we want, and it'll be a new message now. But that's not really what I want to focus on. I want to take some more time to focus on some of the cool things that you can actually do with strings. Let's say that our string message is initialized with whatever it is that I put here. It's some nonsense value, but it's not really relevant to what we're going to be talking about. The important part of what we're doing is, let's say we're using first a method that's inbuilt to string that we can use to find the length of a given string. So if we go in, we can manually go and find the length of this string, but let's say our program needs to know the length of a string, and the string is rather long. You wouldn't want to have to sit there counting each one by one. You'd rather want to go about the process programmatically. So what you can do, instead of just going and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, it's already getting a bit harder to do it, and this is only 12 characters, but to sit there for hours upon hours just counting this would be a complete waste of time. If the program needed to know how long this string was, Java has a very nice way for you to go and calculate what that is. And how we do that, how we use methods on different string types or string variables is pretty cool. What you have to do is first reference the variable itself. So we have the message, and this doesn't need to be done within the system out statement. This could really be done anywhere in the code. The reason I'm putting it within the system out is so that we can actually see it be printed to the console, because any code that is just lying around here and that's not within the system out statement won't be printed. So I can actually go and do the same thing right here, and we can use the method by having a dot operator right after we reference a variable, and then we use the method that they have inbuilt. And for the length of a string, it's nice and simple. The name is length. And what you have to make sure to do, especially when you're trying to use a method, is you have to have those open and close parentheses. In some cases, you might have to provide a parameter in between between those two, depending on what the method requires. For length, you can go ahead and leave that blank. That wouldn't be an issue. Now, if I were to go and run this code, we actually wouldn't see what the length of that string was. So instead of doing that, I mean, this code will work as is right now, but I want to have this method, oh, not that. I want to have this method.length actually work within this code right here. And then I can go and click run, and it should return back the length of that string. And sure enough, it has returned a length of 12, which is exactly what we were expecting. And because we can think of this as some sort of an operation, we can actually take whatever the result of this message.length was, and we can assign it to some variable. So this is where combining two different types comes into play. And let's take this and let's assign it to an int called variable, and we'll just have it be done as so. Then we can actually go and print out this variable, and should then again print out 12. So all it's really doing, and what I wanted to show you here, is that this method has a return type, and that return type is of type int. So that's why I've ended up using an int variable to store this, because I want to make sure the type is correct. And you can find the type of a method once you've written out the code for using that method by just hovering your mouse over that method name. And we can see int java.lang.string.length, and that int at the beginning just means that it returns the length of the string, in this case, in form. So that's why we can store it as so. Without making the rest of this video too long, I just want to cover a few more things really quickly about strings. I know we said we'll talk about a few different string methods. We'll talk about really quickly char@, and we'll talk about equals and concat. And we'll just go through very basic code for now, just to show you how these things work. But we'll touch upon these again later on in the course, and you'll get to experiment with using them a little bit later as well. So hopefully those things are clarified a bit down the road. The first thing that I want to talk about is char@, then. And this method of a string is so that you can get a specific character of a given string. Let's say I wanted to pull this J, and I wanted to just output that J from this string message. So what we would do is, again, we would have that variable referenced message, and then to use a method, we have to have that dot operator, and then we can do a char@. And when you double click on that, it'll have these open and closed parentheses that are already there, and it'll have this index, which we can take out for now. All that really means, if you understand how to use this method, is that once you hover over it, you'll see what this method requires. And this method requires that you provided some parameter within those two parentheses. In this case, that parameter is going to be an integer value, as we can see by this method char@, and then in those parentheses it says int. So we know we have to give it an int value. We can give it an int value either in the form of some variable, but to keep things simple for now, we'll just actually put in a real int value. And what that's going to do is it'll return the character corresponding to that index. So if you remember, strings in Java are done using zero-based indexing, and we can have that be the case. And to get this J now, we would have to then use zero-based indexing to figure out just what that index was, and we'll be able to output that. So you can go, the D is going to be at character 0, H at character 1, and J at character 2. So once we go ahead and supply the parameter to that method and hit that run button, we should get J to output to the console because of the zero-based indexing. And again, that's just a very simple thing that I wanted to show you for now. Later on, you're going to get to experiment a bit further with this, and hopefully you get to try it out yourself. Next, let's go and actually have the equals method. So when you want to test if two strings are the same, you have to use a special method called equals. And I'm just putting some random value right now. From just looking at these two different strings, we can see that they don't have the same value. So if we were to go and try this method, it wouldn't return a true value. So let's just say that I want to test if message 2 is equal to message 1, or the first message. Let's just reference our first variable, message, dot, and then we can do equals. And we'll do an open parentheses, and it automatically did that close parentheses for us. Now we want to see what parameters are required for this method. So we'll hover over it, and it says the method equals takes in an object. And we don't understand fully at this point what the object is, but what I want you guys to take away from this is just understand that when you're using an equals method, you want to make sure you're supplying it with another string value, or another string variable or value within those two parentheses, so that it can check the equality between two strings. Logically, it makes sense that if you want to check the equality between the first string and a second string, you would have to supply that second string to the method of the first string in order for you to check if they're equal. Otherwise, it wouldn't know against what to compare, and it'll throw a syntax error because you haven't supplied a given parameter. But for now, let's just go ahead and type in message 2, and that's a way that we can use some of those variables that we've been working with. Let's hit run, and once we hit run, we'll see that it is indeed false. And that's because these two strings indeed are not equal. And just to show you that it does work in the case that these two strings are equal, I'm going to actually take the first string and I will copy it into, oh, not that. Let's Command Z that. Something went wrong. Let's just take that and Control C, Control C, and then we'll do a Control V. Okay, and now once we run it, we should get true because those two strings are indeed equal. Yes, we see that they work perfectly together now. Finally, the last method I want to touch upon is, let's say you have two different strings, each of them are in different variables, and you want to have both of those strings be essentially added to one another. And what I mean by that is that you take whatever your first string is and you want to add whatever the content of the second string is onto that. And what we're going to use to do that is something called a concat method. And we'll do that by referencing first our message variable, and we'll do a message, and then dot, and then concat. And we can see before we even did anything that we had that little pop-up that tells us a little bit more about the method. So again, if we were to just hover over this concat method, we see that it takes in a type string. So we're kind of getting the hang of figuring out what kind of parameters are taken in for some of these methods. And let's say we want to just take whatever message 1 is, and we want to add it to message 2. Or no, we want to take whatever message 2 is and we want to add it to message 1. The way we'll do that is to have message.concat, and then we'll type in message 2. And what this should do is now take the two strings and this concat method, actually, when we hover over it, we'll see that it returns a type string. So because this method returns a type, we can actually have this information be stored in a separate variable, which I'll show you in just a second. But for now, let's just go ahead and run this and see that it is indeed working for what we wanted it to do. So it takes the contents of message 1 and it adds the contents of message 2. And that's what this concat method does. What we'll do finally is just have a close off with message 3, which will just be the result of this concat. And we'll just show that very quickly by adding that in right here. And then we'll do system.out.println message 3. And we'll go ahead and run that, and we'll see that it indeed does exactly what we wanted it to do. So I hope that gives you a better grasp on some of the things we talked about in the previous lecture, especially getting to see some of the code involved with it. I encourage you to go ahead and try that code. And yeah, that's pretty much all that I wanted to get you all to grasp from this lecture. I hope that was pretty engaging for you all, and I hope that you stick around for the next few lectures as well. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you in future videos.